The history of Spain dates back to the early Middle Ages. In 1516, Habsburg Spain unified a number of disparate predecessor kingdoms. Its modern form of a constitutional monarchy was introduced in 1813, and the current democratic constitution dates to 1978. After the completion of the Reconquista, the kingdoms of Spain were united under Habsburg rule in 1516. At the same time, the Spanish Empire began to expand to the New World across the ocean, marking the beginning of the Golden Age of Spain, during which, from the early 1500s to the 1650s, Habsburg Spain was among the most powerful states in Europe. During this period, Spain was involved in all major European wars, including the Italian Wars, the 80 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, and the Franco-Spanish War. In the later 17th century, however, Spanish power began to decline, and after the death of the last Habsburg ruler, the War of the Spanish Succession ended with the relegation of Spain, now under Bourbon rule, to the status of a second-rate power with a reduced influence in European affairs. The so-called Bourbon reforms attempted the renewal of state institutions, with some success, but as the century ended, instability set in with the French Revolution and the Peninsula War, so that Spain never regained its former strength. Fragmented by the war, Spain at the beginning of the 19th century was destabilized as different political parties representing liberal, reactionary, and moderate groups throughout the remainder of the century fought for and won short-lived control without any being sufficiently strong to bring about lasting stability. The former Spanish Empire overseas quickly disintegrated with the Latin American Wars of Independence and eventually the loss of what old colonies remained in the Spanish-American War of 1898. A tenuous balance between liberal and conservative forces was struck in the establishment of constitutional monarchy during 1874 to 1931 but brought no lasting solution, and Spain descended into a civil war between the Republican and the nationalist factions. The war ended in a nationalist dictatorship led by Francisco Franco, which controlled the Spanish government until 1975. The post-war decades were relatively stable, and the country experienced rapid economic growth in the 1960s and early 1970s. Only with the death of Franco in 1975 did Spain return to Bourbon constitutional monarchy headed by Prince Juan Carlos and to democracy. Spain entered the European Economic Community in 1986, and the Eurozone in 1999. The financial crisis of 2007-08 ended a decade of economic boom and Spain entered a recession and debt crisis and remains plagued by very high unemployment and a weak economy. Spain is ranked as a middle power able to exert regional influence, but unlike other powers with similar status, it is not part of the G8 and participates in the G20 only as a guest. Spain is part of the G6. Prehistory. The Iberian Peninsula was first inhabited by anatomically modern humans about 32,000 years BP. The earliest record of hominids living in Western Europe has been found in the Spanish cave of Atapuerca, a flint tool found that dates from 1.4 million years ago, and early human fossils date to roughly 1.2 million years ago. Modern humans in the form of Cro-Magnons began arriving in the Iberian Peninsula from north of the Pyrenees some 35,000 years ago. The most conspicuous sign of prehistoric human settlements are the famous paintings in the northern Spanish cave of Altamira, which were done c. 15,000 BC and are regarded as paramount instances of cave art. Furthermore, archaeological evidence in places like Los Millares and El Laga, both in the province of Almeria, and La Almolla near Murcia, suggests developed cultures existed in the eastern part of the Iberian Peninsula during the late Neolithic and the Bronze Age. Spanish prehistory extends to the pre-Roman Iron Age cultures that controlled most of Iberia. Those of the Iberians, Celtiberians, Tartessians, Lusitanians, and Vascoans, and trading settlements of Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and Greeks on the Mediterranean coast. Early history of the Iberian Peninsula. Before the Roman conquest, the major cultures along the Mediterranean coast were the Iberians, the Celts in the interior and northwest, the Lusitanians in the west, and the Tartessians in the southwest. The seafaring Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and Greeks successively established trading settlements along the eastern and southern coast. The first Greek colonies, such as Emporion, were founded along the northeast coast in the 9th century BC, leaving the south coast to the Phoenicians. The Greeks are responsible for the name Iberia, apparently after the river Iber. In the 6th century BC, the Carthaginians arrived in Iberia, struggling first with the Greeks, and shortly after, with the newly arriving Romans for control of the western Mediterranean. Their most important colony was Carthago Nova. The peoples whom the Romans met at the time of their invasion in what is now known as Spain were the Iberians, inhabiting an area stretching from the northeast part of the Iberian Peninsula through the southeast. The Celts mostly inhabited the inner and northwest part of the peninsula. In the inner part of the peninsula, where both groups were in contact, a mixed culture arose, the Celtiberians. The Celtiberian wars were fought between the advancing legions of the Roman Republic and the Celtiberian tribes of Hispania Iteria from 181 to 133 BC. The Roman conquest of the peninsula was completed in 19 BC. Roman Hispania. Hispania was the name used for the Iberian Peninsula under Roman rule from the 2nd century BC. The populations of the peninsula were gradually culturally Romanized, and local leaders were admitted into the Roman aristocratic class. The Romans improved existing cities, such as Tarragona, and established others like Zaragoza, Merida, Valencia, Leon, Badajoz, and Palencia. The peninsula's economy expanded under Roman tutelage. Hispania supplied Rome with food, olive oil, wine and metal. The emperors Trajan, Hadrian, and Theodosius I, the philosopher Seneca, and the poets Martial, Quintilian, and Lucan were born in Hispania. Hispanic bishops held the Council of Elvira around 306. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, parts of Hispania came under the control of the Germanic tribes of Vandals, Suebi, and Visigoths. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire did not lead to the same wholesale destruction of Western classical society as happened in areas like Roman Britain, Gaul and Germania Inferior during the early Middle Ages, although the institutions and infrastructure did decline. Spain's present languages, its religion, and a basis of its laws originate from this period. The centuries of uninterrupted Roman rule and settlement left a deep and enduring imprint upon the culture of Spain. Gothic Hispania. The first Germanic tribes to invade Hispania arrived in the 5th century, as the Roman Empire decayed. The Visigoths, Suebi, Vandals and Alans arrived in Spain by crossing the Pyrenees mountain range, leading to the establishment of the Suebi Kingdom in Galicia in the northwest, the Vandal Kingdom of Andalusia, and the Visigothic Kingdom in Toledo. The Romanized Visigoths entered Hispania in 415. After the conversion of the monarchy to Roman Catholicism and after conquering the disordered Suebic territories in the northwest and Byzantine territories in the southeast. The Visigothic kingdom eventually encompassed a great part of the Iberian Peninsula. As the Roman Empire declined, Germanic tribes invaded the former empire. Some were foederati, tribes enlisted to serve in Roman armies, and given land within the empire as payment, while others, such as the Vandals, took advantage of the empire's weakening defenses to seek plunder within its borders. Those tribes that survived took over existing Roman institutions and created successor kingdoms to the Romans in various parts of Europe. Iberia was taken over by the Visigoths after 410. At the same time, there was a process of Romanization of the Germanic and Hunnic tribes settled on both sides of the limes. The Visigoths, for example, were converted to Arian Christianity around 360, even before they were pushed into imperial territory by the expansion of the Huns. In the winter of 406, taking advantage of the frozen Rhine, refugees from Vandals and Sueves, and the Alans, fleeing the advancing Huns, invaded the empire in force. 3 years later they crossed the Pyrenees into Iberia and divided the western parts, roughly corresponding to modern Portugal and western Spain as far as Madrid. Between them, the Visigoths, having sacked Rome 2 years earlier, arrived in the region in 412, founding the Visigothic Kingdom of Toulouse and gradually expanded their influence into the Iberian Peninsula at the expense of the Vandals and Alans, who moved on into North Africa without leaving much permanent mark on Hispanic culture. The Visigothic kingdom shifted its capital to Toledo and reached a high point during the reign of Leovigild. Visigothic rule. The Visigothic kingdom conquered all of Hispania and ruled it until the early 8th century, when the peninsula fell to the Muslim conquests. The Muslim state in Iberia came to be known as Al-Andalus, after a period of Muslim dominance. The medieval history of Spain is dominated by the long Christian Reconquista or Reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule. The Reconquista gathered momentum during the 12th century, leading to the establishment of the Christian kingdoms of Portugal, Aragon, Castile and Navarre, and by 1250 had reduced Muslim control to the Emirate of Granada in the southeast of the peninsula. Muslim rule in Granada survived until 1492, when it fell to the Catholic monarchs. Importantly, Spain never saw a decline in interest in classical culture to the degree observable in Britain, Gaul, Lombardy and Germany. The Visigoths, having assimilated Roman culture during the tenure as foederati, tended to maintain more of the old Roman institutions, and they had a unique respect for legal codes that resulted in continuous frameworks and historical records for most of the period between 415, when Visigothic rule in Spain began, and 711, when it is traditionally said to end. However, during the Visigothic dominion, the cultural efforts made by the Franks and other Germanic tribes was not felt in the peninsula, and were not achieved in the lesser kingdoms that emerged after the Muslim conquest. The proximity of the Visigothic kingdoms to the Mediterranean and the continuity of Western Mediterranean trade, though in reduced quantity, supported Visigothic culture. Arian Visigothic nobility kept apart from the local Catholic population. The Visigothic ruling class looked to Constantinople for style and technology, while the rivals of Visigothic power and culture were the Catholic bishops, and a brief incursion of Byzantine power in Cordoba. Spanish Catholic religion also coalesced during this time. The period of rule by the Visigothic kingdoms, or the spread of Arianism briefly in Spain. The councils of Toledo debated creed and liturgy in Orthodox Catholicism, and the Council of Lerida in 546 constrained the clergy and extended the power of law over them under the blessings of Rome. In 587, the Visigothic king at Toledo, Reccared, converted to Catholicism and launched a movement in Spain to unify the various religious doctrines that existed in the land. This put an end to dissension on the question of Arianism. The Visigoths inherited from late antiquity a sort of feudal system in Spain, based in the south on the Roman villa system and in the north drawing on the vassals to supply troops in exchange for protection. The bulk of the Visigothic army was composed of slaves raised from the countryside. The loose council of nobles that advised Spain's Visigothic kings and legitimized the rule was responsible for raising the army, and only upon its consent was the king able to summon soldiers. The impact of Visigothic rule was not widely felt on society at large, and certainly not compared to the vast bureaucracy of the Roman Empire. They tended to rule as barbarians of a mild sort, uninterested in the events of the nation and economy, working for personal benefit, and little literature remains to us from the period. They did not, until the period of Muslim rule, merge with the Spanish population, preferring to remain separate, and indeed the Visigothic language left only the faintest mark on the modern languages of Iberia. The most visible effect was the depopulation of the cities as they moved to the countryside. Even while the country enjoyed a degree of prosperity when compared to the famines of France and Germany in this period, the Visigoths felt little reason to contribute to the welfare, permanency, and infrastructure of the people and state. This contributed to the downfall, as they could not count on the loyalty of the subjects when the Moors arrived in the 8th century. Islamic Al-Andalus and the Christian Reconquest. The Arab-Islamic conquest dominated most of North Africa by 710 AD. In 711 an Islamic Berber raiding party, led by Tariq ibn Ziyad, was sent to Iberia to intervene in a civil war in the Visigothic Kingdom. Tariq's army contained about 7,000 Berber horsemen, and Musa bin Nasser is said to have sent an additional 5,000 reinforcements after the conquest. Crossing the Strait of Gibraltar, they won a decisive victory in the summer of 711 when the Visigothic king Roderick was defeated and killed on July 19 at the Battle of Guadalete. Tariq's commander, Musa, quickly crossed with Arab reinforcements, and by 718 the Muslims were in control of nearly the whole Iberian Peninsula. The advance into Western Europe was only stopped in what is now north-central France by the West Germanic Franks under Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours in 732. A decisive victory for the Christians took place at Covadonga, in the north of the Iberian Peninsula, in the summer of 722. In a minor battle known as the Battle of Covadonga, a Muslim force sent to put down the Christian rebels in the northern mountains was defeated by Pelagius of Asturias, who established the monarchy of the Christian Kingdom of Asturias. In 739, a rebellion in Galicia, assisted by the Asturians, drove out Muslim forces and it joined the Asturian Kingdom. The Kingdom of Asturias became the main base for Christian resistance to Islamic rule in the Iberian Peninsula for several centuries. Caliph al-Walid I had paid great attention to the expansion of an organized military, building the strongest navy in the Umayyad Caliphate era. It was this tactic that supported the ultimate expansion to Spain. Caliph al-Walid I's reign is considered as the apex of Islamic power, though Islamic power in Spain specifically climaxed in the 10th century under Abd ar-Rahman III. Abbasids overthrow the Umayyad Caliphate. The rulers of Al-Andalus were granted the rank of emir by the Umayyad Caliph al-Walid I in Damascus. Emir Abd al-Rahman I challenged the Abbasids. The Umayyad Caliphate with origin in Hejaz, Arabian Peninsula or Emirate was overthrown by the Abbasid Caliphate or Emirate. Some of the remaining Umayyad leaders escaped to Castile and declared Cordoba an independent emirate. Al-Andalus was rife with internal conflict between the Islamic Umayyad rulers and people and the Christian Visigoth Roman leaders and people. In the 10th century, Abd ar-Rahman III declared the Caliphate of Cordoba, effectively breaking all ties with the Egyptian and Syrian caliphs. The Caliphate was mostly concerned with maintaining its power base in North Africa, but these possessions eventually dwindled to the Ceuta province. The first navy of the Caliph of Cordoba or Emir was built after the humiliating Viking ascent of the Guadalquivir in 844 when they sacked Seville. In 942, pagan Magyars raided northern Spain. Meanwhile, a slow but steady migration of Christian subjects to the northern kingdoms in Christian Hispania was slowly increasing the latter's power. Even so, Al-Andalus remained vastly superior to all the northern kingdoms combined in population, economy and military might, and internal conflict between the Christian kingdoms contributed to keep them relatively harmless. Al-Andalus coincided with La Convivencia, an era of relative religious tolerance, and with the golden age of Jewish culture in the Iberian Peninsula. Warfare between Muslims and Christians. Muslim interest in the peninsula returned in force around the year 1000 when Al-Mansur sacked Barcelona in 985. Under his son, other Christian cities were subjected to numerous raids. After his son's death, the Caliphate plunged into a civil war and splintered into the so-called Taifa kingdoms. The Taifa kings competed against each other not only in war but also in the protection of the arts, and culture enjoyed a brief upswing. Medieval Spain was the scene of almost constant warfare between Muslims and Christians. The Almohads, who had taken control of the Almoravids Maghrebi and Al-Andalus territories by 1147, surpassed the Almoravids in fundamentalist Islamic outlook, and they treated the non-believer Demis harshly. Faced with the choice of death, conversion, or emigration, many Jews and Christians left. By the mid-13th century, Emirate of Granada was the only independent Muslim realm in Spain, which would last until 1492. Despite the decline in Muslim-controlled kingdoms, it is important to note the lasting effects exerted on the peninsula by Muslims in technology, culture, and society. The Taifa kingdoms lost ground to the Christian realms in the north. After the loss of Toledo in 1085, the Muslim rulers reluctantly invited the Almoravids, who invaded Al-Andalus from North Africa and established an empire. In the 12th century, the Almoravid Empire broke up again, only to be taken over by the Almohad invasion, who were defeated by an alliance of the Christian kingdoms in the decisive Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212. By 1250, nearly all of Iberia was back under Christian rule with the exception of the Muslim kingdom of Granada. The kings of Aragon ruled territories that consisted of not only the present administrative region of Aragon but also Catalonia, and later the Balearic Islands, Valencia, Sicily, Naples and Sardinia. Considered by most to have been the first mercenary company in Western Europe, the Catalan company proceeded to occupy the Duchy of Athens, which they placed under the protection of a prince of the House of Aragon and ruled until 1379. The Spanish language and universities. In the 13th century, many languages were spoken in the Christian kingdoms of Iberia. These were the Latin-based Romance languages of Castilian, Aragonese, Catalan, Galician, Aranese, Asturian and Leonese, and the ancient language isolate of Basque. Throughout the century, Castilian gained a growing prominence in the Kingdom of Castile as the language of culture and communication, at the expense of Leonese and of other close dialects. One example of this is the epic song written after the military leader El Cid. In the last years of the reign of Ferdinand III of Castile, Castilian began to be used for certain types of documents, and it was during the reign of Alfonso X that it became the official language. Henceforth all public documents were written in Castilian, likewise all translations were made into Castilian instead of Latin. At the same time, Catalan and Galician became the standard languages in the respective territories, developing important literary traditions and being the normal languages in which public and private documents were issued. Galician from the 13th to the 16th century in Galicia and nearby regions of Asturias and Leon, and Catalan from the 12th to the 18th century in Catalonia, the Balearic Islands and Valencia, where it was known as Valencian. Both languages were later substituted in its official status by Castilian Spanish till the 20th century. In the 13th century many universities were founded in Leon and in Castile. Some, such as the Leonese Salamanca and the Castilian Palencia, were among the earliest universities in Europe. In 1492, under the Catholic monarchs, the first edition of the Grammar of the Castilian language by Antonio de Nebria was published.